Welcome, everybody. Thank you for being here. Gosh, how lucky are we to be the first people on stage today? I'm Julianne Brands. I'm a partner with the Oregon Venture Fund. We are a collaborative venture fund investing in early stage companies in Oregon. We're based in Portland, and we're excited to be here. And I'm thrilled to be joined by Chris DeVore. Chris, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. You know my name. I started in 2008 a seed fund up in Seattle called Founders Co-op, so have been investing up there for about a dozen years and currently investing out of our fourth fund. In 2010, I started with a partner the Techstars Seattle program, so I've also run a startup Accelerator for the past 10 years and just passed the torch on that this past year to a fellow named Isaac Cato. So I've been doing very early stage software stuff in the Northwest for quite a while.
Awesome. Well, that will be quite relevant to today's discussion. We are here to discuss accelerators and their role in building startup ecosystems. We're going to talk about some stories, best practices, and lessons learned that Bend and really all of Oregon can take to heart and learn from. So Chris, you've certainly had an impressive career so far. As you mentioned, you're a managing partner at Founders Co-op, and you've been a founder and active angel investor. But perhaps most important for today's discussion, you were instrumental and have been instrumental in building Seattle's startup ecosystem. And especially helped found Techstars Seattle. So I think it'd be great to start with the impetus for founding Techstars Seattle and maybe the goals in those early years.
Yeah, I mean, I'll do a little storytelling and interrupt, please, as we get through it. But useful to know, I'm a Seattle native, and so I spent my early career out of town, because when I was growing up in Seattle, it was mostly a company town. It wasn't clear that it was going to be a startup place. So I was part of a early stage company in the Bay Area in the late 90s that some partners and I started and grew for a while and then sold to a public acquirer. I moved back to Seattle in 2001 and started a venture-backed business there with a business partner. And just the experience, my partner had come from Boston, I'd come from the Bay Area. Seattle was a much harder place, we both felt, to be an entrepreneur. Just, lots of engineering talent, really deep in that category. But it was a really tough place to raise money, to recruit, to get media support. All the things that were sort of in the water in the ecosystems we've been in were either not present or scattered across the ecosystem up in Seattle. And our first impulse was, well, let's start a fund. Maybe it's a money problem, and we can just, dollars are the limiting reagent. What we quickly found that was, money's only useful as far as it goes if you don't give an on-ramp for people, whether it's founders or mentors or other investors, to figure out how to participate in the ecosystem. Because there's always pockets of excellence, and I'm sure that's true. It's certainly true in Portland, it's true in Bend. There's really high-performing founders, experienced people. There's people who write checks. There's people who can give good advice. But if they don't know how to find each other, then the magic doesn't happen. People don't come together. And so the spirit of Techstars, how many folks in town know what Techstars is? Just a quick show of hands. So you're familiar with it. It was actually started in Boulder, another smaller mountain town that had pockets of excellence and really wanted to make magic happen. And the way I describe Techstars is it's almost like an API in the sense that it's just a framework. It doesn't really matter who runs it or how you do it, but it gives everybody a legible schedule over the course of the year, which is, here's when you apply, here's when mentors can engage, here's when investors can engage, here's the demo day. So that if you're latent in the ecosystem and you want to participate, it gives you a way to be, oh, I know who to talk to, I know when to show up, and I know when to get my wallet out. So I would say that basic framework can be applied in any ecosystem, and the question is with what expectations or what kind of outcomes. But that was really how we got started with Techstars in Seattle, and so there are over 100 Techstars Seattle alumni. There were several other programs. My partner, Abiel Ginsberg, runs an Alexa Accelerator with Amazon, and he just finished his third class on Tuesday. So there's probably about 150 companies that have raised in aggregate about $1 billion through the Techstars Seattle community, which is significant contribution to the ecosystem.
Yeah, that's great. So how many folks in the room are entrepreneurs or founders? Great, that's awesome, cool. So in those early years especially, what were the biggest benefit for the entrepreneurial community, and what did the founders find most important and most valuable about the accelerator itself?
Right. So I think the beginning of it is really just finding your people, finding your peers. Being a founder is an incredibly lonely journey, as many of you know. And one of the advantages of having a selective admission cohort-based program is that rather than kind of casting about and trying to find people who are doing the work that you're doing, creating a cohort. In Techstars, we do 10 companies at a time. We pick 10, hundreds of companies apply. We pick 10, and they actually come and physically sit in our office. So even though it's only for 3 months, you build this very tight network of relationships amongst your peers who are about the same stage as you and trying to do something with the same level of ambition as you. And I think that many founders, I think, don't appreciate it. When they apply, they think, well, this is all about me and my company. But what they realize once they get in is I've created a peer group that actually is going to stay with me for the rest of my career. And it changes their sense of isolation and aloneness, and I think helps them be better at what they do by they push each other along to performance. Yeah. And for me, like, that's the independent of the financial outcomes, giving high-performing people who are pursuing what's kind of a, it's out, certainly in Seattle or maybe here, it's not the norm to be a founder, right? Most people just want a job, and they want to go home and see their kids. It's a weird choice, and so to find the people who are as weird as you are is incredibly satisfying and motivating
so
to
congratulations to all of you weird folks in the room that raised your hands just a moment ago. So did you have metrics to define success for Techstars and for the Accelerator? If so, how did they change over time, and if not, what were the successful factors?
Yeah, and I think this is one of the tricky things about, and we were talking about this briefly just before we came up on stage, Techstars is designed to provide access to the institutional venture capital industry. And venture capital is a very specific financing tool for very specific kind of companies and certain kinds of outcomes. And I think the worry that I have about saying, well, if Techstars worked in Seattle, it can work anywhere, is not every ecosystem has all the pieces in place to support those kinds of outcomes. It doesn't mean the Accelerator framework isn't useful, but I think if your goal is how many of your companies get access to institutional VC financing, that's it's a very high bar to establish, and that's why I think I would be careful not to overfit that pattern or that model. But for us in Seattle, that was the expectation, is we would radically increase the odds of founders getting access to institutional financing at the end of the program. I mean, there's other softer metrics, but that's the one that we really measured ourselves against.
Yeah, awesome. Well, let's talk a little bit more about the local ecosystem and maybe how we can apply some of the best practices in Seattle to other markets. When you think about the other ways that accelerators can be important, it feels like the connectivity piece across founders and to local investors can be really important. Do you think there's value in just that kind of helping folks get started, even if you don't kind of scale to the institutional venture piece or to a huge company overall? What is the value in just kind of the network at the ground level?
Yeah, I think that's the foundational kind of work that an accelerator can do in any ecosystem, is, like I said at the beginning, helping the people who are passionate about this work find each other, because they often are not, even in a small community, they don't all know each other. So just building a relationship network amongst people who care about this kind of work, so that when they need a mentor or they need to find an investor or they're trying to recruit a new leader for their organization, they have a network built up to do that work. I think the other thing that it allows you to do is build patterns of behavior. One of the things that's really powerful about the Techstars model is we call it a mentor-driven accelerator. And so we invite people who want to help founders in to spend time with those founders. We actually gather feedback on the companies from the mentors and on the mentors from the companies. So so candidly, we score mentors based on how helpful they are. And I don't know maybe everyone here is doing everything for the right reasons, but not everyone is as positive an actor in an ecosystem. And if there are people who are not bringing what we call a give first mentality to it, who are really trying to figure out how they can, wangle something for themselves out of it, those people get worked out of the ecosystem. So it's a little bit of a filtering and kind of cleansing mechanism on an ecosystem, where you help identify who are the really positive contributors, and you shine a light on them so everyone knows who they are. And you also make sure that if there are people that are not being as positive, that they get some coaching about what does it mean to be supportive of founders. And that creates it's almost like the river flowing behind us. You need some flow in a system with a regular cadence to bring in good actions and to flush out bad actions. And it acts as that kind of a flow mechanism or a filtering mechanism in a way that I think lifts the quality of the ecosystem.
Yeah, and we talked about this a little bit before today's discussion, but when you think about specific markets and building our own ecosystems in different markets, it feels like there are different recipes that work across different areas of the country. But what do you feel like are the key ingredients that are important to kind of flow into a recipe, whether it looks like Ben's startup ecosystem or Seattle or Portland's?
Right. I mean, I think the most foundational is talent, right? That's it's ambitious people with unique skills who are driven to achieve something. And I think one of the luxuries that Bend has is it's just such a great place to live, is you get people who might otherwise have lived in San Francisco or Seattle who choose to be here, and in figuring out how do we continually draw more people into an ecosystem, whether it's through organizations like this, or having great employers, or having academic institutions, but what can you do to make a place magnetic for human capital, which is the first and most important thing. The second is, again, to have kind of a fabric so that they know how to plug in, which we talked about. Like, what are the gateways for someone who's new to town to be like, where are my people? How do I find them? And then the last, I think everyone just focuses on money. Money's important, but money is an enabler for the first two. If you don't have the first two, no amount of money will change the outcomes in an ecosystem.
Yeah, that's a great point. So Techstars Seattle now has grown quite a bit, as you've discussed. As you think about building and scaling a startup ecosystem, what have been some of the challenges as you've grown both in Seattle and through the Accelerator?
Boy, so many. I mean, one of the.
We only have a few minutes.
Yeah, I know, exactly.
Pick a couple.
So the one thing I want to acknowledge is, Techstars Seattle has had a good run, but a lot of it is the fact that Seattle has benefited from an extraordinary good fortune. First in having obviously Microsoft founded there, but then Amazon's choice to move its corporate campus to the center of downtown, which created a center of excellence, or basically a critical mass of talent that then Google and Facebook and Pinterest and others. So we've just had in that market such a tailwind at our back about creating good outcomes. And so when I think about, again, like what's portable from that? Like how do you, because not every city's going to have that. It does feel like finding your successes and celebrating your successes and basically making as much noise as you can, because talented people want to be where great things happen. And you have to start with what you have, but anytime you have a win in an ecosystem, making those people visible and celebrating them and making them the heroes of the ecosystem so that others who aspire to that say, look, I don't have to leave town. Like if they did it here, I can do it here too. Or if you're not from here and you're thinking of coming. So it's the one thing I think a comment is nothing happens fast. I think Seattle, I grew up there. I left in '86. I came back in '91. I left again. I came back in 2001. Like, I've been watching that ecosystem grow for 30 years. If you take a 20 or 30-year mindset, you can say, look, I get where we are today, and if year over year we're helping build great companies, we're helping them find capital, we're creating great outcomes, and we're recycling those stories and that money and those, like, over 20, 30 years, you're going to have an incredible impact. But if you try to rush it, you're often pushing on a string because you have what you have. And one of the cautions I always have for people who are they're in a hurry to make a difference is sometimes you can hurry too much and try to force something which your ecosystem or your community just doesn't have the resources yet to support.
So what do you think is the biggest difference in Seattle 20 years ago versus today?
I mean, honestly, it's good luck that Amazon chose to be based in downtown. AWS and the shift to the cloud, I think the depth of cloud talent and machine learning and talent that's come, so like critical mass of talent. And then frankly, and this is sort of more of a civic infrastructure thing, the fact that the Bay Area has so far failed to deal with basic things like housing and transportation, they are choking on their own success. And Seattle isn't perfect, but at the margin, by allowing the housing stock to grow, by investing in civic infrastructure, whether it's light rail or waterfront park, these things matter. And so it's not just about the startups and the money. It's about, are you building a place that's magnetic for humans? Because we aren't just workers. We want to live our lives. And the more that your city is magnetic to people because it's a great place to live, that's a secret weapon that I think Seattle has leaned into. That clearly the Pacific Northwest, we have unfair advantages there. And it breaks my heart, having lived in San Francisco, to see that city sort of really failing to embrace growth and making it a place where everyone can live. But we've all been net beneficiaries. We all probably know Bay Area refugees who've moved up here because it's gotten to be a hard place to live.
Anyone willing to raise their hand as a Bay Area refugee? Oh, okay, all right, a couple, good for you. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, at the Oregon Venture Fund, we think a lot about creating this virtuous cycle of wealth generation in our ecosystems, and investing in entrepreneurs to help invest in the next generation of entrepreneurs. And one thing we think about a lot is, do we see, founders who have created and built their own companies coming back to reinvest in that next generation of companies? So are you starting to see that happen? Do you find it important? And is that a metric that we can use to define success in our startup ecosystem?
So yes, critically important. I think one of the reasons why Seattle has underperformed as a startup ecosystem is it's been a great vector for wealth creation amongst employees, right? So most people who made money in tech in Seattle, they weren't founders, they weren't present at the creation, they joined a company that happened to create just extraordinary success. And so if you look at it, it's like, well, they made millions of dollars as a tech employee, they should be reinvesting that in the startup ecosystem. But because they have no real experience of entrepreneurship, they just, they were talented and they made a difference and they made a bunch of money, but they aren't, the impulse to recycle is not as much there. So I think the behavioral modeling of people who've made money in tech, recycling their know-how and their wealth to help the next generation, that's a flywheel that you have to really actively nurture. And so in fact, when we're recruiting mentors for Techstars, a lot of it is successful founders. We want them to help with their advice, but frankly, we want them to get out their wallets because too much of the wealth that's been generated in the ecosystem isn't flowing back. Whereas I think, the Bay Area probably uniquely, so much wealth has been created, and the behavioral expectation is that you recycle, you become an angel investor, and that's massive kind of grease on the wheel of their flywheel. And we're making progress, but we got a long way to go.
I do think one thing the Northwest, and I'll speak for Oregon, has going for it is this kind of collaborative sense. And maybe it's markets that are outside of Silicon Valley as well who want to feel like we want to support the entrepreneur next to us just as much as we want to support ourselves. So I think we have kind of that giving mentality going for us that will hopefully continue.
I totally agree. And in fact, I think that the underdog mentality, that founders are underdogs. So channeling and leaning into that, but also challenging yourself to being, am I doing what I can to support the underdogs in my community because they need our help. It's not going to happen by accident. We all have to step up and do it.
Yeah, absolutely. So maybe before we go to audience questions, any advice that you would leave the folks in the room, whether they be entrepreneurs or investors, as to how they can best tap in and support their own startup ecosystems?
The fact that they're already here means that they're way down the road. This is not new information for you. You wouldn't be here today. I think probably the main thing I would say is back to the, nothing happens fast. If you take the right time scale and you commit yourself to this work for 20 years, you will be amazed in retrospect what you and your community have accomplished. So be impatient, but be persistent, and know that this is going to take a long time, and amazing things are happening, will continue to happen. I think it's rushing to achieve an outcome that I often think leads people in the wrong direction.
Well, great. Any questions from the audience on startup ecosystems? It's all right if not. It's still early. Hopefully folks have had their coffee. Great. I think I see one here in the middle. We can try out the catch box for the first time today. Nicely done. All right.
Hey, my name is Hussein. I'm from Oregon State University. And basically, I'm a student, and I'm a senior right now, and I'm facing this dilemma. Basically, I want to get into the industry, work on my career, but at the same time, I have a project that I want to work on, and I don't know what and how the balance I can get between those two. What's your intake on that? Should I get into the industry, get my experience in there, and then try to invest more in my project, or should I do it half and half? What's your take on that?
All right, so I'm sure we both have opinions about that. So as an investor, I am more focused on business products than I am consumer. And I think the answer is different depending on what your interests are, because for consumer solutions, often people who are in the kind of the emerging category, so young people just getting out of college or starting their first job, are the ones that are actually setting the tastes for consumer. And I think some of the most interesting consumer startups come from people who aren't burdened by biases about how it's supposed to be done, and they just invent, and often they fail, but they learn in the process. If you are pursuing a business idea, it's rare for me to find a founder who deeply understands a business problem who hasn't lived with that problem. And usually those founders, they got really frustrated, why do we do it this way? It's so broken. I want to solve it the right way. So I would say if you're more inclined to do a business thing, spending some time in an industry that you find compelling and learning how that industry works, but also discovering how it doesn't work, where it's broken, might lead you to a more insightful first point of entry. Then you just wouldn't have enough perspective having not worked in industry, would be my take on that.
Yeah, Yeah, that's a great point. And I think if you look at the data for both of those two markets, I suspect that the awesome young founders have tended to be in the consumer space. And we definitely tend to think about how much have you experienced the problem you're solving? How painful was it to you personally? And do you have an insight that nobody else has because you've worked in the industry? So we tend to anchor on that quite a bit. Not all funds do, but that's a perspective that's been successful for us so far. Yeah, awesome. Sitting in the front rows.
So in your experience and applying your experience to, with forces like AI and, impacts to regionalization and infrastructure and communication, continuing to evolve, what kind of new trends are you seeing those produce in entrepreneurship? Are you seeing anything new over the last 30 years, new things that are disrupting that community and that market?
I mean, I guess that's a big topic, and I think I'll start by saying one of the reasons why being a technology investor is so exciting is that software is being worked into or being refactored in almost any industrial category. And I think that the evolution was first like, are you still using paper and pencil, or are you using software? That was leg one. Second, are you gathering data over time series, and are you using your data to make better decision making? And I think the next iteration is machine learning, which is, are you using that capability to discover patterns and data that humans otherwise couldn't see? So to me, it's kind of a continuum where machine learning or artificial intelligence is a new capability that's being added to this sort of trajectory of the adoption and the progress of using software and data to just make business more effective. What's great about it is that I think that there used to be a tech industry. There isn't a tech industry anymore, right? Everybody has to be in the software business. Everyone has to be gathering their data. Everyone has to be analyzing their data. So as an investor or as an entrepreneur, the discontinuous opportunity, like the breakage that's happening around industry for those who are early or those who don't adopt it, there's opportunity all over the place. And frankly, it's no longer just in one narrow slice of the economy. It's the whole economy.
How's that been affecting your accelerator or the approach around entrepreneurship?
Yeah, I think I might just add that we think a lot about this particular question and how it relates to regional ecosystems. So we found technology's impact on specific industries as being a consistent theme over the last few years. And as you think about, well, where are the biggest, oldest industries that have the thorniest problems to solve with technology, they're not necessarily in Silicon Valley. And so we think that creates a huge opportunity for technology's impact in industries that haven't traditionally seen it. And the awesome side effect of that is that it probably makes it easier to start a company from anywhere, because to your earlier question, you have the industry expertise and you've experienced that thorny problem. So bringing in technology to help solve that problem is going to be best suited for you.
One quick thing I'll add, just is one of the patterns that we really like is in an industry that has a legacy system that they find very difficult to rip out, whether it's ERP systems or Salesforce, is how do you add software and intelligence as a layer on top? So don't require a rip and replace solution, but figure out how do you actually make the end users who have to use that data happier in their work life. You can often create a really interesting value prop that makes the customer indifferent about where the data sits, because you're solving the problem for the end user, and that creates a really interesting strategic leverage about, well, if you don't care if you're using Salesforce or something else, that becomes really threatening to the folks who own the legacy system, as just one pattern of where to look for stuff.
Awesome, great. We'll go here.
I mean, it's a great question. One of the reasons why I think Brad feels compelled to say it, and I have to say it out loud, is it's not a common framework. Everybody wants something yesterday, and they want the time horizon. So, for example, I'll give you one example. Techstars worked with lots of corporations to do accelerators, and the average duration of those corporate accelerator programs is usually 2 to 3 years. And then they'll churn out and decide, well, we didn't get enough out of it, or we want to bring it in-house. And I think the lesson learned usually is you've only begun to figure out how to do this work in the first 2 or 3 years. And so to some extent, we're repeating ourselves about how long it takes because of the frustration of seeing people who don't get that and who cycle out earlier. But the short answer is finding people whose time cycles match that. So venture investors, their funds last 10 or 12 years, they have to think in those long cycles. Universities that have endowments have to think about, like their capital planning. Anyone whose native planning motion is a decade or longer is likelier to get this. City planners, people who do infrastructure, economic development people, everyone whose job it is to look into the future understands this. But often people who work in corporate environments where they're measured quarter over quarter really struggle to get their head. And frankly, no one's like CEOs 10 years, 3 to 4 years. Often corporate partners are the last to be able to embrace this kind of time scale because of the churn in their business and leadership pattern.
That's great. I had a question over here.
Thanks for chat, Chris, and Julian. I'll take benefit of the fact that you're from Seattle and you're from Oregon. Chris, is it true that the ecosystem in Seattle tends to be more focused on B2B and enterprise businesses, and the investors tend to be more open to those opportunities? If that's the case, what are you doing to make sure there's no Seattle refugees coming to Oregon with B2C and D2C businesses?
Good question. You could probably pick up what happens in Oregon. So back to my earlier point, which talent is the root stock of any ecosystem. It happens that Seattle's talent was mostly developed. Engineering talent was developed in Microsoft and Amazon. Amazon is a consumer company, but most of the engineering depth is really around cloud infrastructure. And so that it sort of stands to reason that our deepest pool of talent or our highest velocity kind of place to find innovation is on the business side. That said, there are some really interesting consumer brands like, Amazon is a consumer brand in a way, Nordstrom, Starbucks, Costco. It's not that we don't have any consumer brands, but they have typically those brands are older and they didn't make their success through technology innovation. They mostly did through just building a great business slowly over time. So I think Seattle occasionally can produce really exciting consumer internet things. So Zillow and Redfin and OfferUp are consumer-facing businesses that have achieved real success. But I think if you ask an investor in Seattle, what do you see most of the time? Like where's your deal flow? The deal flow is going to be 80% enterprise.
Yeah, and just to add on to that, I do think it speaks to the great brand power that Oregon has, and Washington as well, Seattle as well. But when you look at a Hydro Flask here in Bend or a Nike in the Portland region, like we have this awesome group of talent that knows what it takes to build a real relationship with your customer, and we're seeing that be really impactful for direct-to-consumer businesses or businesses, or even, enterprise software businesses who are really selling to an individual. That talent is really hard to find, and I think we can do a lot more to capitalize on that experience and how we can think about investing in those types of companies. Yeah, I think I saw a question here and then back there.
Yeah, this trend towards innovation districts, most of the current innovation centers were organic, right? South Market, San Francisco, et cetera.
We'll repeat it back. Go ahead, and we'll paraphrase.
Oh no, you got the box coming. Okay.
Most of the innovation centers have been centered around organic growth, organic spin-ups, and now we have innovation districts being formed. Portland's has their innovation district they're trying to get spun up. Bill Gates is buying $5 billion worth of Tampa to build one there. What do you feel about how that can accelerate? Will it accelerate? Do you think it's a flag planted in Portland that will actually be a catalyst to another level of growth?
Yeah, in my experience, and in working in startup ecosystems, it's usually not one solution that is going to be the silver bullet. It's taking a long-term approach that will enable an ecosystem to develop over time. So what I love about partnering with economic development organizations is that they take a very long-term view of what success looks like. And so we've chosen to partner with a number of organizations like that as a venture fund because it matches our timeline. And what I do also think needs to happen is all of the other good stuff that can begin with that flywheel of somebody taking the first leap. And so that's great entrepreneurs, great talent, successful stories of companies that have done well. So it's not going to be just one thing that's going to cause a Bend or a Portland or a Seattle to do really well over time, but rather a collaboration of many groups who feel very dedicated to the long-term success of our ecosystem. So yes, a great start and a lot more to do.
One thing, I'll just jump in a little bit. When I see real estate leading, I get worried Because to me, it's where's the talent? Where's the talent want to be? And usually build it, and they will come from. When it starts to feel like a real estate strategy and not an innovation strategy, I get nervous, and that often happens late in the cycle, when it feels like everyone wants to be on the innovation train and everyone's corporate venture funds are starting, and everyone wants to build space. We work as sort of a late stage example of that. So just hold on to your wallet when you start to see that happen.
Yeah, interesting. I think we had a question back here. Oh, wait, sorry, we got to wait for the box. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Nice throw. Let's see. This is a question for both of you as investors. Being a younger investor and not wanting to go back and get my MBA, I'm wondering, what can I read? What should I listen to? And specifically, where or what comes to mind in terms of finding mentors, because I just have so much to learn and so much I want to learn, and I want to jump in further to the venture world.
Great. Yeah, so I'll say at the Oregon Venture Fund, we're a collaborative venture fund, and the whole reason we have this collaborative model is because we pull on the expertise of the investors in our fund to help us make investment decisions, given their industry experience and the fact that many of them have built and run their own startups. So we've actually institutionalized this way to translate knowledge about how to do early stage investing. So we think about how do we build frameworks and best practices and do workshops to make sure all of us are up to speed on best practices. So not to be a plug for the Oregon Venture Fund, but I'd be happy to chat with you more about how we can help support you, because we have had investors say it's like getting your MBA in venture investing. So yeah, happy to chat more about that.
And I'll just add, as a business school dropout and a self-taught venture capitalist, I totally feel your pain. What's been so great about the last decade or so is that venture used to be this very closed-door, opaque, and it now, everyone is blogging and writing books, and it just feels like there's so much more ability to bootstrap your own learning. But to your point, it's a small community. There aren't that many of us who do this for a living, and in my experience, people are very open to getting, everyone's got a point of view, and you might agree or disagree with their strategy, but I've rarely encountered an investor who's not willing to sit down and talk about how they think about their work for your benefit and to learn from your experience as well.
Great. Well, I think we maybe have time for one last question. Oh, nope, we don't. Okay, that's an X sign. All right, cool. Well, Chris, thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you all for your great questions. Yeah.
Thanks, everybody.